The Mexican Muralist movement began in the early 1920s on public buildings in Mexico. The work was furthered at several colleges and their walls in the US. The inspiration came from a community of people that supported the Mexican painters that are known as Los Tres Grandes, and in the 1930s they took their work to the United States. Their work was commissioned by university donors and also art committees. The story focuses on the revolutionary movement that these murals had on American culture and their institutions. It also discusses a very important piece of identity and unification that took place because of this artwork, which later inspired the Chicano movement in the 1960s. The environment that uplifted these painters to dream about challenging the boundaries of art is set at the Academy of San Carlos in Mexico City. The Academy was founded in 1791 as it duplicated Spain's Academy of San Fernando that was established in 1752. The emphasis was to train artists in drawing, painting, and sculpture. This cultural jewel became a model academy for Latin America. The richness of the architecture was the perfect setting for painters to have the confidence that they could produce a new medium that was so distinct and could be so Mexican. It was the quality of painters that surfaced during this period of time that helped each of them create a competitive environment to push and elevate their creative work. It is important to understand the political and economic forces that were facing Mexico as the muralist movement was taking form in the late 1890s. Mexico was in a state of severe transition as its American neighbor was establishing both a mining and agricultural presence along the southwest territory of the United States. Mexico's bloody revolution of 1910 lasted until 1920, killing over 1 million people. This created a migration exodus as Mexicans looked for refuge along the Mexican border in towns of Laredo and Ciudad Juarez. The economics forced people to also seek work in larger metropolitan cities within Mexico, leaving smaller rural communities. This resulted in a wave of Mexican migration to the United States that really focused on increasing from like 20,000 migrants in 1910 to about 50 to 100,000 migrants every year thereafter. Take into consideration the Spanish flu that also killed 400,000 people, and you could see that the landscape of Mexico was a country that was looking for peace, identity, and also healing. An important figure to introduce is Gerardo Murillo Coronado. He's also known as Dr. Atl. He is often overlooked in the movement. Atl means water in the Aztec language. He intentionally changed his name to reflect his proud views of his Mexican identity and his heritage. Dr. Atl was born in Guadalajara and plays an important figure in inspiring key artists of the movement. He was a student of the Academy of San Carlos, and he was later a teacher that influenced Rivera, Orozco, and Siqueiros. He returned to Mexico in 1903 with a motivation that Mexican art needed a revolution. This is after spending time in Europe, specifically in Paris, and through a commission by then President Porfirio Diaz. In 1910, just months before the Mexican Revolution begins, he paints the first modern mural in Mexico. The theme of the mural is female nudes. He later becomes the director of the Academy of San Carlos, and there he was known as the agitator. This theme is really important for it becomes the heart of the Mexican muralist movement. Mexico was in survival mode during this period of history. The country was led by President Porfirio Diaz, who ruled Mexico under dictatorial rule during the periods of 1876 to 1880 and once again in 1884 to 1911. Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata were the leaders of the Mexicano Revolution that were fighting in favor for the poor and their land rights. Both Villa and Zapata were instrumental in overthrowing the dictator Porfirio Diaz, which resulted in hope for Mexico. There were several transitions of leadership which were short-lived, as Mexico is finding stability in leadership. The culture of power to the indigenous poor is also a common theme in the Mexican mural movement, which looks at the people to have basically rights to look at the art instead of having it as a private collection. President Alfaro Obregón takes power in Mexico as the new president on December the 1st, 1920. He appoints José Vasconcelos as director of the National University of Mexico in 1920 to 1921. and then as minister from 21 to 24, Vasconcelos plays an important part as he is tasked with uniting a country that was ravaged through war. His vision is that of nationalism in order to overcome the tremendous racial, cultural, socioeconomic, and even geographical difference in Mexico, which the revolution had brought to light. He builds a strategy that focuses on having artists and teachers be the heavy lifters and act as conduits to knowledge and culture. The educational strategy that he builds is that of three departments: the Department of Education, the Department of Library, and the Department of the Arts. And that is where the muralist movement actually is funded from. He searches for those talented artists and recruits them to come to Mexico City. And the first place that he looks at is the Academy of San Carlos. He launches this movement and he offers them the opportunity to paint in public walls, freedom to explore the vision, and also a government commission. Roberto Montenegro was the first artist commissioned by Vasconcelos. The next major decision for Vasconcelos was to find the right public building that had the exposure to tell a story to a people that regretfully had an illiteracy of 80%. Vasconcelos sent an invitation out to the San Carlos alumni in Paris, where Siqueiros and Rivera were at. He also sent one to Orozco, who was in the United States. Roberto Montenegro went to work to paint the mural, Tree of Life, in the Colegio de San Pedro y San Pablo. It is painted in the inner walls of the college's church. It is a large mural that measures about 10 by 10 meters, that also overlooks the church and is painted with a simpler tone of decorative art. From the look of his work, it does not have the avant-garde passion of the movement, and this is perhaps why his work is not as well known and why he does not receive credit for the movement. Diego Rivera entered the movement by painting his first mural at the Colegio de San Ildefonso. This college is now a museum, but when it began in the 18th century, it was a boarding school that educated the elite of Mexico City. At the time of the movement, the chemistry of the public space and the passionate artists became the spark that ignited the modern muralism of Mexico. Diego's work triggers this through his mural La Creación. Reflecting on the mural, one looks at the overall themes. This work leans on religion, showing a picture of a man extending his arms towards his values. On the left, one looks at what seems to be the creative arts, while on the right, it emphasizes education and knowledge. In my view, these are important messages that Vasconcelos wanted to highlight for Mexico, and it seems that Diego stuck to the script. It is a better delivery than Montenegro's work, for it motivates a group of artists that follow him and paint at the great walls of the Colegio. Siqueiros and Orozco also paint and contribute to the mural movement of Mexico on those walls of the Colegio. The movement represents a renaissance for Mexico as it inspires the creativity of artists and the powerful cultural message of Vasconcelos. The migration to the United States also took the muralists and their work north past the border. José Clemente Orozco was the first of Los Tres Grandes to explore the United States. He traveled in his early 30s to San Francisco and also to New York in 1917. He returned a decade later to New York and had gained a following in Mexico as a great muralist and wanted to experience the growing strength of the U.S. Orozco finds three great opportunities in liberal arts schools. The first was in 1930 as he painted his first mural, a very important piece, Prometheus, at Pomona College in Claremont, California. Later in 1930 and 1931, he paints at the New School in New York City, where he paints 5 murals. The first, Science, Labor, and Arts. The second, Homecoming of the Worker of the New Day. The third, Struggle in the Orient. The fourth, Struggle of the Occident. And the fifth, Table of the Universal Brotherhood. The third project takes Orozco to Hanover, New Hampshire, at Dartmouth University in 1932 to 1934. This is a 24-panel piece that covers over 3,200 square feet of wall space. All 3 murals do not disappoint and do nothing but strengthen the movement. Diego Rivera spent time in the 1930s and 40s in the U.S. He completed significant mural work in Detroit and also in New York. But his major contribution to higher ed is in the heart of San Francisco. He contributed 2 crucial pieces. The first, painted in 1931, Still life and blossoming almond trees. It was intended for Rosalie Stern, the wife of the president of Levi Strauss & Company. The mural is now an art piece at the Stern Hall Dormitory at Cal Berkeley. The second piece, Pan American Unity, is vast and powerful. Rivera created this creative piece at Treasure Island as an exhibit for the Golden Gate International Exposition in 1940. This piece belongs to San Francisco City College, but the mural has been loaned out to MoMA San Francisco, and it will transition back to San Francisco City College after the summer of 2023. To close out this movement, we must connect how the key artists returned home to paint at their universities in their native land. Orozco was invited back by the governor of Jalisco to paint at 3 buildings. His first project was at the University of Guadalajara. He paints a mural on an auditorium. The piece is known as El Pueblo y sus falsos líderes. His second work is El Hombre Creador y Rebelde. He finishes his work in 1935. Diego also returns home, and in 1951 he accepts a commission to paint a mural on the Olympic Stadium of the University of Mexico. The piece is known as La Universidad, la Familia y el Deporte en México. His health is deteriorating, and he's also mourning his beloved Frida, which create obstacles for him to complete the work. David Alfaro Siqueiros paints El Pueblo y la Universidad al Pueblo in Mexico City in 1952 to 1956. This work is completed in an outdoor mural at the Universidad Autónoma de México. Orozco and Rivera regretfully both passed away in Mexico City, and Siqueiros dies not far from them in Cuernavaca, Mexico. The 1960s and 70s saw murals return as they transformed to tell a new struggle that included those key symbols pertinent to the new cultures that may have been from Mexico at one point in time, but that had evolved with yet another layer of stories, efforts, and experiences. Those in power intended not to share the assets with the new immigrants that helped build the United States, and that's where the conflict begins. The major themes were similar struggles faced in Mexico, for it focused on human rights, educational reform, and the questioning of land rights, identical to how the U.S. treated Native Americans as it built its colleges, a pattern that is clear is under the Moral Act of 1862. For Chicano X, I quote, "In some ways what happened to Mexican Americans in the Southwest happened time and again throughout American history. Promises were made to a community, but many were never kept," unquote. The key symbol is the flag of Aztlán, for it reflects the southwestern states of the U.S., a reminder to the Chicanx population of the land removal by the U.S. government, specifically when the rules excluded them from their rights.